good afternoon to most. Today is January 17th, Friday, and we have WX Live webinar number 101, or better known as Uncle Pete's Corner session number 22. And he has a topic here that he wished he had seen last month called Generic File Import Function, whatever that is. Cool stuff. All right, it's all yours, Pete.
Very cool. So, something that we always wind up having to do is, we get some kind of request for importing files. We also always get requests for exporting files, and thankfully with the AAF features of WinDev, we can pretty much just click on a button and have export. But import, we still need to do a little work. There are some functions that WinDev gives for importing files, but they don't really handle the what is commonly referred to as Excel formatted CSV files, which is double quoted strings with commas in them. It doesn't seem to handle those files quite so well, so I've wind up having to write my own parsing logic, and I've done it 3 or 4 times in different projects now, and this project that I'm working on right now, we had a ton of them going, and we decided to invest the time in trying to make something a little more generic that we could add new tables to it to import without having to do a lot of work. So that's what we're going to look at today. Before we get started, give a nod to Bob Ruse. Last month he was showing some of his importing stuff, or it may have been 2 months ago, and he kind of gave me the inspiration for being able to set the position of the fields for the import instead of requiring, customer be column 1, address be column 2. As we'll see as we go through this, you can actually configure from an end user standpoint that type of stuff. So let's take a look at it functionally first, and then we'll dive into the code. So this is my product browse, and if you just click on the import button, all this came up because I'm using the default manager to remember all the settings from the last time I imported a file. So you'll see that in the code as well. So we're going to import the product.csv file. It has a header row. I want to delete the existing data, completely start out with a fresh new product file. The file's comma separated. I've got it supporting commas, pipes, and tabs. And these are the fields that are in the product table, and the order that they're going to come in from the CSV. And I also can turn on match this field, which means if I don't delete the data and I have a field set for match, if that field already exists in the database, it'll update that record instead of creating a new record. Really handy for importing zip code tables. Every quarter, some of my projects, we get a new updated zip code table. So it's real handy to be able to import that new one, have it update the records instead of completely rebuilding them every time. So the next thing that you can do once you've got it configured is you can do a test import. And you didn't see it because it went by so fast, but there's a progress window that we'll see in more detail later. But when you do a test, it just grabs the first 10 records and shows you how the import's going to look. So that's an indication to us of whether we've got our configuration right. It's a good test of the configuration. And then once you're happy with everything, you do an import, and now we'll actually get to see the progress bar run. And it looped through twice, read the data, and then wrote the data. And we'll see all that in the code. If we come over to our customer browse, I've got it attached there as well. And this shows some of the additional functionality that we have. Notice address line 1, I've got it set to position 0. And this is because I've reconfigured it. By default, it came up as these numbers came up differently. What I'm doing here is I'm saying that address line 2 is not going to be included in my CSV file. And if we were to go out and look at this file, in fact, let's go grab that file real quick and look at it. Notice that we have name, company, address, city, state, zip, phone, email. We don't have address 2. So that's where having the functionality of being able to reorder these or set them to 0 allows us to import a CSV file that does not perfectly match the layout of our database file. You know, if phone and email were flipped around in the CSV file, I could change their positioning here and still be able to import the file. So that's the functionality that we've got in the import. So now let's go actually take a look at some code. And the first thing we're going to look at is that I call it a generic import. There is a little bit of code that I have to add to enable it to work with a new table. And that's this switch statement right here. As you see right now, I've got it configured to work with the product table and the customer table. For this to work with any other table, this is the only thing you have to do is add a new case statement right here. And we'll talk about some ways that you could make it 100% generic. We made the decision for this project that we didn't want to do that extra work. So anyway, let's look at this code. So the only parameter passed into the procedure is the name of the table we're going to import. And then that's used in this switch statement. So if we passed in the product table, it changes the title bar of this window to import products. And then there's an array of field lists. That is what's building that table that we saw. And let me run it so we can see this side by side. This is that array that we're building right here. So we're saying what the field name is. And notice both for the table name and the field names, I'm using the .name property instead of hard coding those as strings. That's one of the handy things about WinDev and having those name properties is I don't have to worry about typos here. IntelliSense gets product.name, .name, you know, and now if you decide later you're going to rename that field or whatever you do, the automatic updates of the source code will handle that. Where if I had hard-coded that via a string, you know, I could make a typo in the typing the name of the field. You could change the name of the field. A lot of things could go wrong. So this just makes your code a little more fault tolerant. So as we see, I set up the 3 fields of product and their positions, 1, 2, and 3. And then I set the product name to be matched for updates true and the other 2 to false. That, again, this is the only code, what I've got highlighted right there is the only code that is specific that had to be added to support the product import. The rest of this code is 100% generic. All right. So now let's take a look at the actual code of the procedure, and we'll kind of step through some of this stuff. As I mentioned, we import, the only parameter that comes in is the name of the table. And if we come over here to the products, this is the code that calls it. All we do is open the window, pass in the name of the table, and then when it comes back, I just redisplay this table. Since the import's going to obviously add records, update records, we want to reinitialize the table. So that's all there is to call the import. This is a structure, structured variable. Most of the guys in the group are our old Clarion guys. These were groups in Clarion, except they've got a lot more power in WinDev. Field name, field position, match for updates. Those are the three that you saw me populating in the array down below when we were looking at the switch statement. Notice this conversion code string. I've got that in there as a stub for a future addition to this thing. My thoughts is sometimes you need to do some conversion work on a field before you can import it. You could embed that code in this conversion code string and dynamically execute that as part of the import process. Haven't done that work yet, but I just went ahead and put that stub in place so that I could do it later. Before we go too much further, let me talk about, let me jump back down to the case statement. If you wanted this procedure to be 100% generic, one of the things that you could do is you could enumerate the analysis and get this information about what tables and what fields are in those tables, and even whether or not it's a unique key, and you could extrapolate and build this stuff on the fly by enumerating the analysis. Obviously, one of my issues with doing that is you would expose the sysids as imports. And I don't want to expose the sysids for imports. They're all auto-numbered. You could do some logic based on the name, if you're consistently naming your sysids to avoid them, different things like that. So there's a lot of things you could do to make that code more generic and even get rid of this switch statement if you want. It takes me, less than 5 minutes to expose a new table. So to me, it's worth doing that little bit of work myself because it gives me some control over maybe there's a field that I don't want to, that just makes no sense to ever have as part of the import, like the sysids. It lets me say which fields are exposed for match for updates, all of that type of thing. But you could definitely make it more generic if you wanted. And if you want to do that work, I'm going to point you to Glenn Rathke's training materials because he has examples showing you exactly how to enumerate the analysis and so forth and get that information out of it. So between this code and Glenn's code, you could make it purely generic if you wanted. So there's two things to kind of give you a take this and go forward and even take it further. You could make it more generic, or you could work on this conversion code piece so that you could have some code that dynamically executes to convert a procedure or a particular field. So that structure that we've already looked at, and down below we're going to define an array on that structure. The next structure is the prompt structure, and what I'm using this with is this is all the values for all the prompts of the screen, including, notice that, and this is where arrays and structures become very powerful in WinDev. Notice this structure includes an array of this structure. So now, along with storing these values, I'm also storing that entire array for this table. And that's what allows me to then save that whole thing off in the default manager later, and I remember every setting of that screen with one line of code, and we'll see that shortly. So that's what this structure is about. Next structure is the separator structure, and all that is the name that I expose in the combo box and what the actual value is. So comma, comma symbol, pipe, pipe symbol, tab, and the constant for tab. A lot of different ways I could have done that. I could have hard-coded the combo, put some logic of when you make a selection to set the value, but I like to do it like this. It just seems a little cleaner to me. I define this array. Then if we look at this combo, it's based on the separator array. It displays name and returns value. So we'll see in the rest of my code, all I do is refer to combo separators, and there's no logic at all other than in my initialization declaring that array. So that's the way I like to do those little lookups. You know, there's, again, half a dozen different ways you could do it. That's what kind of works for me. Next structure is imported row structure. And notice this is just 50 string fields, field 1 through 50. This, I am going to, here in just a second, we're going to declare an array of this structure. This is the imported data. If you wind up having a table with more than 50 fields in it, you know, first you need to have a conversation about proper database design. Failing that, the next step would be you just need to, you know, do field 51 through 75 or whatever you need. And the other thing that this array, or the structure, the array that's defined on this structure is used for, is this sample table. You know, where we saw the sample when we did a test. Notice the 50 fields are all defined in this, and they're all linked to that array. The content of this table is the imported rows, which is the array declared of those structures. So that's how I am showing the user the imported data for the test data, and we'll see that in the code here shortly also. So now we've got all of our structures declared. Now I'm declaring an array of the imported row structure. A couple of variables that we use for the progress bar. A field list variable that is the instance of the structure. You know, a structure is not a variable itself. You can't do anything with the structure. You have to, once you've declared the structure, then you have to declare a variable that is that structure. A structure is nothing different than an int, a string, whatever. You know, it's just a definition. You still have to create a field that is that definition. Just like file size is int, field list is field list structure. And then we're declaring fields, which is an array of that field list structure. And then prompts is an instance of the prompt structure. Here's our switch statement that we already looked at. Now it should make a little more sense to us. You know, field list is that instance. I fill it out, and then I add field list of fields, and that's how I populate a structured array. And if you have not worked with structure arrays yet, take some time, and really play with them and beat up on them a little bit, because they are real powerful and you can do a ton of things with structured arrays. So that is all the global setup code. We've seen all of it now. Next thing is at the end of the knit, so right before the window opens, I've got a little bit more code here. Prompts, remember we declared prompts as an instance of that prompt structure. And I'm setting file name, header row. These are all the fields. You know, it's the fields that hold all these values. I'm setting them to their default values, including the fields array. And then once I've done that, then I set prompts equals get default from the default manager. Now the default manager is one of my open source classes. You know, you can go download the open source stuff off of my blog, use the default manager, and how it works. And the reason that we're populating these defaults is the first time you call get default, if there's nothing set already in the default for this, and I'm using the table name as part of the key to the default, so it's import product. If it doesn't find an entry already for that default, then it saves whatever is currently in that variable to the default. So the very first pass through this, you know, if we were starting out fresh, didn't have any default saved, it's going to save all of these as their default value, comma separated, has a header row, don't delete, and the fields based on what settings we made here. You know, and then it's going to save it out. But now once we've gone through, and we're going to see here shortly where I do a save default, and that updates whatever settings the user's made on the screen. So now the next time we come through, this get defaults, and that's the whole reason. You know, let's go back over to customer for a minute. Address line 2, position 0. Well, if we look at the switch statement, it said address line 2 was position 4. What happened, we came through here, it set it to position 4, but then get default found where I had already reconfigured that screen and had saved out that new default. So when it loads, it gets that from the default manager. So I use the default manager a lot for this kind of stuff, to save prompts. Really nice for report prompts, so that I save what report prompts they used the last time they ran the profit statement. I use it to save memory menu options and all kinds of different things like that. You know, it's all part of that new, kinder, gentler application that, you know, helps the user out a little more. So anyway, we either by being the very first default or by getting it out of the default manager, we now have our prompt structured variable set to its values. And now we just move those individual values to the screen. That's what these statements are doing. Then the last thing I do, and this is one of those little tricks that once I started playing with it, I caught on to. If I were to go add, say we decide that we need size in our product table, well, I'd modify my product definition, then I'd come up here and add size as a new field to my field list. Well, the get default would, you know, if we've already imported product once, get default wouldn't have that one in the list, and we would never see that field exposed because GetDefault would be getting the list without that one. So that's what this statement does, is it sees if the list that came from the switch statement does match the list that came from GetDefault as to, do they have the same number of fields? If they don't have the same number of fields, then we revert back to the one that came from the switch statement. So now we've reset the list of fields for the default manager because you've added a field from the switch statement. So once we've done that, then we just do a table display of the table fields, which is this table. So once we get the defaults, then we just refresh this table so that you see. And now at this point, we're at the same part of the code of we're right here where this window would normally be at when you first open it. We've set up the entire screen. Any questions up to that point before we get into the actual import code? Is this thing on? Hello?
Here.
Stunned silence.
No questions.
Stunned silence.
Silence. You're stunning
All right.
people.
All right. Well, let's just continue on then.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Keep showing this cool stuff.
So now let's look at a couple other pieces of code. The buttons is pretty much all that's left. Restore defaults is pretty straightforward. It just resets the screen to what the initial values would have been if you had never saved any defaults. So, it's the, just what it sounds like, restore defaults. So, pretty straightforward code. We've seen all that code already. The test import and the actual import both call the exact same procedure, do import, with just a parameter that indicates whether we're in test mode or not. So test or complete is passed to it to decide whether you're in test mode or not. So now let's actually look at the actual import procedure. Or do you think we need to? You don't really need to see that, do you? Okay, so here's the import procedure. As I said, we're passing into one parameter, which is mode. We start out declaring some variables that we're going to use down below, including an instance of the imported row structure so that we can declare each row as we step through the code. And you'll see how that's done. And then we set the static reading data. What this is this static right here on the progress tab. We set it to reading data when it first starts out. We sort the field list by field position, and then we get the last one. And what that's doing is I want to know what's the highest field number. So are there 12 fields in this file or 15 fields in this file to import? How many fields are in this file to import? So in this instance, we're going to get 8 for the customer table because that's the highest position field that you've configured as 8. And we're going to use that logic down below. So that's what max field position is for.
Pete?
Yes, sir.
If you go back there, that was 0 base, so wouldn't it be 9?
It's not 0 base.
Well, I thought the first row says 0.
No. I manually set that. That's field position. What position is it in the CSV file? I set it to 0 because it's not in the CSV file. I could have several of these fields set to 0 because they're not included in CSV file.
Oh, good. I kind of
This
missed
is,
that. Sorry.
yeah, this is what position in the CSV file, what column of the CSV file will it find this field.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry.
Yep. All right. So now the next thing I do is I do an array seek, which is another cool thing that you can do with structured arrays, and we're looking and finding match for updates is true. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to find out if you set any of these fields to be matched for update, and if you have, I record that field because I'm going to need that logic, that information down below for some logic. So that's what this set of code right here is doing. Okay, now we set the tab 2, the progress tab, to make it visible. We hide the sample tab. So we make this tab visible. We hide this tab just in case it happens to be open. And then we actually switch to the progress tab. So what we've done with these 3 lines of code is exposed. So now what you're seeing on the screen is the progress gauge. I open the CSV file. If the CSV file didn't open, we return an error to the user. If it did open, we actually fall into this if statement that runs all the way down to here. And what we're doing in this set of code here that we're going to look at is reading all the records. We don't write them out. We do that in a separate loop. So the first thing we're going to do is read all the records into an array, and then once we've read all the records, we'll write all the records in a separate loop of that array. We find out the file size of the CSV file, and what we're going to use that for is on the progress bar once we get to that. If we turned on the has a header row checkbox, then we skip a line. That's what this is doing here. We're reading one row and just skipping it, because it's the header row. We don't care about it. And we update the progress bar with the length of that row. And if we look at that code, it's pretty straightforward. It's just figuring out the percentage of read so far divided by file size. So, if the total bytes of our CSV file is 1,000 and we've read 50, it takes 50 divided by 1,000 times 100. It knows what percentage is complete, and that's how the progress bar gets updated. I've got it set up to go from 0 to 100, simple percentages. So all I'm doing here is figuring out what that percentage is so that I can update the progress bar. And we'll see as through each loop, all we do is update the progress bar with how many bytes was read in that row. So now we actually get into the loop. Now we're going to loop through each row. So I set the field number to 1. Variable reset is a WinDev function that clears structured data. It'll clear any data, but it's real handy. With an int, you could set it, you could set x equals 0 to clear it. But with a structured variable, you can't just set it to space or anything. So variable reset is how you clear a complete structured data. So all I'm doing is completely making sure that imported row structure is completely cleared. Then I read one row of data from the CSV file. That's going to read one line. Update the progress bar like we just saw. Update our line counter. Test to see if our row indicates end of table. In other words, have we read the entire CSV file? If we have, we break out of the loop, which is going to throw us down to here. And we'll move to that code once we get done. So that's how we get out of this loop once we've read the entire file. So now, once we've read a row, now we start an internal loop right here. What this loop is now we've read a row, we need to loop through each field and process each field. So the first loop through here, we're going to be on field 1. So on field 1, we do a GiftField first rank. Once we've gotten through the first field, then we do a GiftField next rank. And I'm going to show you, we're going to look at the GiftField procedure here in just a second. And you'll see where this first rank and next rank are really getting used. So now let's go look at that. This GiftField is the actual parsing code. So this is the GiftField procedure. And this is the hardest code to read of the entire thing that we're going to look at today. And it's not tough code, it's just kind of ugly code. It's a little harder to read. We pass in 3 variables. The entire row, so the string that was the entire row of CSV data, because we're reading the CSV file as a text file reading row by row. So this is the entire row of data. Rank is either that first rank or next rank. And then separator is, are we using a comma separator, pipe separator, tab separator? And then the next statement that it's executed, clean this up a little bit, is extract string. Extract string is another one of those really cool WinDev functions that if you haven't looked at it, hadn't played with it, go check it out. It is awesome. You take the string rank, that's that first or next, and separator. So what this is saying is take the entire string. So let's open up our product CSV here. And actually, I want to open that in Notepad. That's what I want to open it with. Hang on just a second. So it's taken this row of data, that's coming in as one string. That is what is in row. And it's saying first rank to a comma. So what it's saying is, give me everything in that string up into the first comma. And you're going to see the issue and the reason we're doing some extra coding here. And this is it'd be really nice if extract string was smart enough to know that stuff that's inside double quotes should stay together and not be broke up. It's not. It sees a comma. It says, oh, that's your separator. So we've hit a comma. So what happens is when we go through that code, what the very first time through, it's going to give us, it might just be easier. Why don't we do this? Let's run through this in debugger. I think might be an easier way to see it. Okay, so row equals 100% cuties, tangerine juice, comma, 12 ounce, yada, yada, yada. Okay, now let's look what's in one field. See, one field only got us 100% cuties, tangerine juice. It did not get us the entire string that we really were wanting to get. We didn't get what we should have got was all the way to 12 ounce juice, but we didn't because of that extra comma. So that's what this if statement is doing here. If the one field starts with a double quote and doesn't end with a double quote, then I know I hit something with a comma in the middle. I hit a separator in between my quoted string. If that's the case, so now let's step through, see that we fell into this statement. Then we strip off the first quote, and then we do a next rank. Now, we saw first rank said, get us to the first separator. What next rank does is say, take us to the next separator. You could do the same thing. You don't have to use these constants of first rank, next rank. You could have a counter and say 1, 2, 3, 4, and it would take you to the fifth comma, or whatever you put in there. The nice thing about the constants is I don't have a counter in here. I don't have to keep track of what separator I'm working on. I do a first the first time through, and then after that I do a next, and I get the next one each time. So what I'm doing here is concatenating. I loop through here until I get to one, to that double quote, and I extract a little more and concatenate it on to the one field that I've already got. So now I got that 12-ounce juice. Now the only thing is I need this statement strips off that closing double quote. All right, first our while test again, fails. Now we're going to strip off, like now we've got that double quote on the end we don't want. It stripped that off, and now it's going to return 100% Cuties tangerine juice, 12 ounces. Perfect. That's what we wanted parsed as the first field. So let's step through that. Once we've gotten the field parsed, then we look up and say, we know this is the field number 1. So now we're looking up the field list. What you put as field 1, we can't see the screen right now, but we're looking to see, and I think I've got the screenshot over here so you could, no, I don't have it. We're looking to see what did you specify as field 1. So, and you may not have specified a field 1. You may have a field in your CSV that's not in there. So what we're doing is saying, okay, I've read the first field, I've parsed it. What do you want me to do with that first field? So you take that position, look up in the array of the list of fields that the user configured. If they said field 1 of the CSV goes to this field of the database, we're going to find a record. And all we do is now we say we're using indirection here, and we're setting the imported row field number, in this case 1, equals that parsed value. So what that's doing, remember we've got that imported row structured variable that we cleared up here. So once that indirection fires right there, see, I found it. Now the indirection fires, and we can actually look at, let's add this to the debugger, we can look at the structured data for imported row and see it put that in field 1. Okay, let's step a little further. Now we're going to increase the field because we haven't reached the max. We test to see max is 3. That was the test that we did up above here to find out what was the maximum number of fields. So we're going to increase the field to 2, and we're going to jump back up and loop through again. This time, we're going to execute get field with the next rank, because we only want to do first the very first time for the row. After that, we always want to do next. So now we're doing a next. And that's just going to do the extract string again. And it's actually going to step through because the name and the description are identical in this file. It's going to do the exact same thing, but now that put it in field 2. Okay, it's a slightly different name. All right, and now we get to field 3, and now we'll see it perform a little different. Again, we do a get field next rank. This time, one field equals 1963. Since it doesn't start or end with a double quote, it falls completely outside of all that test. And now we test to see if it starts with a double quote and didn't have a comma in the middle. It's going to fail that test too, so none of this code gets executed. So we just return a result that we got from extract string. Again, it's going to look that up and find it as field 3. So it's going to put that in field 3 of our structured variable. Now we've reached our maximum field. So we know we had to process 3 fields for every row of the CSV file. We've processed our 3 rows, so now we're going to add the array, and this is why we're doing this into the structured variables, because now we can add, we have an array of that structured variable, so now we can just add this row to our imported rows. And then we break out, which breaks us out of the internal loop. When we break out of the internal loop, this loop here is the loop that's looping through each column of a row. We've broken out of that. Now we want to know, have we done 10 lines and we're in test mode? What this code is for is when you do test import, it only processes 10 lines. You don't want to do a test import of 100,000 records just to display on the screen. So we only test the first the first 10 lines, and that's what we show in the table. So that's what this code is doing. If that doesn't pass and break us out, which it doesn't, then we come back up. We set field number equals 1. We're going to start back over with the first field. Again, we clear that structured variable that we just built, and now you see it's cleared over here. We read the next row, update the progress bar, and loop through until we've looped through all the rows. So at this point, we've parsed out the CSV file and we've loaded it into our imported rows array. We've handled the import. We just need to write it out now. Any questions? All right. Then moving on. If we've either processed all the rows, we would get an end of table signal here, or we're in test mode and we've read 10 lines, we break out, which takes us to right here. When we break out, we close the CSV file just so that it's not hung open. Then this code tests for if complete, which that is the real import, do the import. So this is the writing code. This whole line of code here only gets executed if you say, I want to write the data out to the table. I'm not doing a test. I've hit the real import button. We changed the static on the progress bar to writing data now. And we reset the read so far, which is part of that progress bar calculation, to 0. In other words, what we've just done now is, our needle hit 100 when we completely read the CSV file. So now we're setting it back to 0 so that we, if you watch when we do a full import, it does reading all the way from 0 to 100, and it does writing all the way from 0 to 100. So, it does 2 passes of the progress bar. Now we're moving our screen fields into our prompts structured variable, and we're doing a save default. So I only save the screen settings when you do a real import. Because when you do a real import, at that point I assume those were the settings you wanted, so I save those settings. So this is where our default gets saved, so that the next time you import the product table, all these same settings are going to come back to you. And it's table specific. It's saving this. This is how you imported the product table. This is how you imported the customer table. We're by making table part of the key to the default manager. All right. Now, if you check the delete existing data, we wipe out the product table completely. And now, file size, we now know exactly how many rows we need to write out. So we're not going to do the progress bar based on bytes read. We're going to do it records process. So this says that our entire size is the entire number of rows that are in our imported rows array. So if we read in 100, this is going to be 100. Each step through, we're going to say read so far equals 1 more. And our progress bar is going to use the calculation of total records divided by records read. Now we just do a for each imported row of imported rows. This is there are a ton of different loops in WinDev code. One of the good things and bad things about WinDev is they don't give us one way to do things. They give us 10 ways to do things. When you start looking at loop logic, there are a ton of different styles and methods of looping. And this is the one that lets you loop through a structured array. And for each row of imported rows, it's going to loop through and make imported row is going to equal that single row from imported rows. We update the progress bar, like I said. We start out with do update equals false, and we're going to see how that variable applies here shortly. Then we see, did you set any fields to match? Remember, way up here, we looked and see if we had a match field. So now, if you do have a match field, what we're doing is we're getting that match field out of the field list, and we're doing an hreadseek on the table for that field with the value imported. So what this statement does, if we were to step through the code, is say hreadseek product name, and Cutie's tangerine juice. So what this is doing is saying, okay, they said use this field to match for updates, and is this record already in the database? If this record is already in the database, set do at date equals true. We set it to false here. If we get into this code, it's going to set it to true. And then down below, we see that if it's true, we do an hmodify, otherwise we do an hadd. So that's what we're doing, is determining whether we need to add the record or update the record. So that's what this if statement here is for. Now we do something pretty similar to what we did before. We start out with field 1, and we're going to loop through every field of our field list. And we're using a little bit of indirection trick here, and we're saying table dot field name from the field list. So this is going to be product dot name, product dot price equals imported row, field 1, field 2, field 3. So this little loop here is setting the table fields equals the array fields so that we can write the record out. Once we've reached the total number of fields that we need to do, so this in the example we're looking at here, we're going to loop through here 3 times and set each of those fields equal the proper value. Once we've done that, then based on the do update, we're either going to do a modify or an add. And then this end statement just loops this up. So what we've just done there is loop through however many rows were in our array, set all the table variables equal the array variables, and either added or updated the record in the table. And once we've completed all of them, that's where we get that little info. File has been imported, and we close the window once you click OK on the info box. Last little piece of code is if we're in test mode. Remember, if we're in write mode, we're going to execute this code, which is going to close the window here, so we're never going to hit this code. If we're in test mode, this if statement will fail, and we'll hit this code instead. So if we're in test mode, remember in test mode, we only read 10 records. So now what we're going to do, we're going to make the progress bar invisible. We're going to make the sample browse tab visible and switch to that tab. We're going to loop through 50 times. Recognize this 50? Remember when we declared our imported row, we declared 50 fields. We're going to loop through all 50 fields, and for each of those fields, if that field exists in our field list, we're going to set its caption to the name of the field, and we're going to make that column visible. Otherwise, we're going to make that column invisible. And then once we've done all those, then we display the imported rows. So let's take another look at that. This table has all 50 fields in it, but notice they're all hidden. What we're doing, and the caption for them is just field 1, field 2, field 3. What we're doing is looping through each one of the, we're looping through 50 times and saying, okay, field 1, is there a field 1 in the field list? If so, okay, what is the name of that field? Make that caption that name, make this row visible. And once we get, so in the example we're looking at a product here, these first 3 get renamed and made visible, and then the next from 4 to 50 all get made invisible because there's no field 4 in the field list, so it gets made invisible. And let's run the program again and see that in action now that we've seen the code. So we do an import. We say we want to do a test. And we can get rid of that. And see, our table has only the 3 fields that we exposed visible, and the names are name, description, price. Now let's go over to customer, do a test, and now we've got name, company name, address, city, state, zip, phone, email. So you see, it looks like this is a window we specifically written for every import, but we really didn't. We just used a little bit of trickery to change the caption names and everything as we needed them. And let me review my notes. I think we've looked at every bit of the code we need to look at this point. Yep. So there you have it. Generic file import. Like I said, it's not 100% generic because you do have this little switch statement that you have to write. But there are ways that you could make that generic if you really needed to. But again, I pulled this out of the project and put into my open source project to get ready for this webinar and to expose product and customers so that I could do this. Literally took me less than 5 minutes because it was only this little bit of code here. You don't have to touch any of the rest of the code of this procedure at all. Just this switch statement is the only code you have to modify to add a new table to the list of tables that you can import.
Holy macro. Hey, Brian McKinney just showed up. Maybe he wants you to do it all over again. I'm only kidding.
All right, so let's look at the switch state. Oh, no. He'll just have to wait for the recording, won't he?
Well, no. What he can do is take the recording and get Glenn's recording and create his indirection version of this.
There you go.
Yeah. Be all. Then he can give a webinar. Okay.
Yeah,
Any questions?
that's the one. Yeah, let's review. This switch statement could be replaced if you wanted to spend the time to enumerate the analysis. And the other piece of code that is this conversion code string down in the do import with each field right here. GiftField would have to have some logic in it that says, is there conversion code? Okay, I need to dynamically execute that conversion code. Say, a prime example would be you store phone numbers as pure numeric. The CSV file has the phone number formatted. Okay, you want to strip all the extra formatting out. You could write code in that conversion code and dynamically execute it. That's what I intend that little piece for. I just haven't done that work. I'm waiting for a paying client to come along and say, hey, I need that, and then I'll do it. I tend to do that a lot. I'll put little stubs in place of, boy, that'd be cool. But if I don't need it for the project, nobody's paying me to do it, I move on about my day of getting things done, but I've laid the groundwork. So if you feel froggy and want to do enumerates, or you want to do that conversion code, jump on it. I ask that you share it with the rest of us once you do. What is match for updates used for? What that's used for is to determine whether, if the record already exists. Say you're importing the zip code table. You don't want to wipe out the zip code file every time. You just want to import it and make any updates that need to be updated. So you set the zip code field to be matched for updates, and then it does an hread seek. It finds that zip code. It does an hmodify instead of an hadd. Any other questions?
So, Pete, what you're saying that match for updates is kind of nearly the unique.
You got to talk a little closer to the mic there, Wolfgang.
Sorry. What you're basically saying that match for update usually tends to be then a key, unique key, which identifies a product code or the unique customer code.
Exactly. Yeah. If you had a product code, a customer code, and I don't use the IDs because all my tables have auto increment IDs. But if you have an external key that like customer number that is not the customer ID, or like I said, prime example is zip code table. I've got several marketing databases where we get quarterly zip code table updates.
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed at how much information changes in a zip code database quarter to quarter. And we do that kind of processing on that import, add any records that need to be added, and just update the other records. And that's what Match for Updates is for.
And it also speeds up the process of the update, because to physically
Right.
delete all the records out and then pull it all back in again, it takes a lot longer than just checking if it's existing and updating those
Exactly. And obviously, if you're going to do Match for Update, it makes no sense to delete all the existing data. Otherwise, you're never going to have a match. I haven't put any logic in the screen to mutually exclude one or the other, but obviously it would make sense to do that.
Yeah, but seeing that you've coded your bit in, you'll make sure that happens. But if you want to make it generic even further, that the end user can choose, you have to put some logic in for that.
No, the end user is able to.
Can they change it?
Yeah. That's. Let me. Let's do this. Let me go back. First, let me run this. All right, let's look at customer import. All right, notice, in fact, let me do a screen print here so we can have the, whoop. All right, so there's what our screen looks like right now. All right, now let's close this thing. And I'm going to go out to the default manager and wipe out my default settings. As soon as I find my default table. There we go. Must be hid under there. There we go.
There you go.
Edit. It's this one. And
I must say your default manager is a nice system. I've implemented.
Yeah, we're using it for all kinds of crazy stuff these days. We're using it for session management for websites.
I just love it. Concept.
Yeah, it's all those little stupid things that you normally would have to create a table for, we no longer do. Yeah. Okay, so now let's run our customer import. Now notice the difference. This is the way we set up the switch statement originally, but I knew that my CSV file did not have address 2, and this is an edit and place table, so that we can.
Is that, okay, because that's the part that I missed.
Yeah.
That's the part that I missed. Okay then. Okay.
Yeah. Now
I didn't realize you could edit in place.
Yeah, I haven't done. It'd probably be nice to have up and down arrows here where you could reorder them that way. I've gone a little old school with it.
Yeah. So you can accidentally have 2 4, which you shouldn't have.
Right.
Zero's okay because that's the ones you ignore, but you shouldn't have 2 column positions the same number.
Yeah.
Unless you write some code, which that stub you were talking about to merge 2 fields, for example, last name and first name, for example.
Right. And for us on this project, we haven't done that kind of error fault checking on this interface because this interface is actually only exposed to us. This is a bit of an odd project. He's working with hospitals, and as part of the setup process, there's
this is more than
hundreds of little tables that he has to import, and they give him CSV files that are all over the map. So it's somebody a little more intelligent that's doing this configuration and setup. If I were exposing this to true end users, I'd have arrow buttons to move these up and down, and I'd probably do a checkbox for not included or something like that to get rid of the ones that aren't being imported. Right.
Super administrator, what do you want to call it?
But the nice thing is the logic would be exactly the same. You know, everything we're talking about here it would just be interface changes, not, you know, the actual import logic would be exactly the same as it is today.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, I missed that part. Thanks.
No problem.
That's
Anything
brilliant.
else?
I don't
Nope.
see anything but
I think
Alan's
you've covered
typing.
basically everything you needed as elegantly enough for a super user.
Why is everybody spelling separator with the 2 E's instead of the 2 A's?
I do it every time. Thank God for IntelliSense.
No, but you do it both ways. In your
Yeah.
code, you have it both
Well,
ways.
whether or not it's IntelliSense or not.
I think I just think you're marking it as your code, so you know it
Maybe.
came from you. I think so. Did you see what John said?
Yeah, John's talking about, yeah, and like I said, it'd be really nice. WinDev gives us one of the other functions they have is string to array that will actually take a comma separated string and pop it into an array. They've got a lot of different functions like that. Unfortunately, none of them are intelligent enough to handle what are called Excel CSV files. And I don't know if Microsoft necessarily dreamed up this whole, you know, double quoting and commas in the middle of stuff. But if you look at the actual spec for CSV files, whatever the RSV, whatever number it is, it's not there. But if you start Googling CSV files, you find out that most people call these files Excel CSV files, and you know they are the norm these days. So you've got to be able to handle them, and it'd be, you know, so by all means, you know, give give WinDev a little nod and say, hey, you know, it'd be real nice if, you know, extract string had an extra option to say, you know, handle embedded commas or something.
XLS option kind of thing.
Alrighty. Oh, what happened?
All right. Any other questions before we wrap up today?
No, I think from our side, I'm very happy.
Yeah. Everyone's happy.
I think you nailed
Everybody's
it.
going to go home and start importing files, right?
That's what I heard.
I actually delayed my project because I thought you might have a good, nice solution, and that's the solution I'm going to be starting to implement.
I don't know, but they're giving me the files in XML, Pete.
Remember that, you know, I mentioned that paying client thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Just saying.
Just
have
saying.
A cup of coffee.
I'm always available.
A couple of coffees.
I have it done in Clarion already, so I'm done.
Sorry, I'm okay.
All right, guys.
Yeah, actually, XML is even easier. The XML features of WinDev are amazing once you really start playing with them and learning them.
Okay. I guess nobody.
All right. Be sure to go vote for next week's topic. There's all kinds of goodies out there on a list of possible topics, and you know, you guys can also send me suggestions about topics, and if I've got something laying around that will work, I'll add it to the vote list or whatever. So I'm trying to include you guys in the process a little bit instead of me trying to figure out what topics to talk about every week.
That is excellent. Okay, so everybody have a great weekend, and we look forward to the next vote. Thanks again, Pete.
All right. Thank you, Arnold.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Recording is stopped.